Welcome to week 4 of the Bible Read-Along program. You're reading the whole Bible, and I'm glad you're doing that. This week, we've been at this almost a month by the time this is over. By the end of the week, you're going to be one day from having finished the two big books at the beginning of the Old Testament, Genesis and Exodus, plus you will have read 28 Psalms. So, that's a lot of stuff that you will be have read at that stage. Something like 118 chapters or so. It's pretty amazing. Okay? So, this week is the second part of the book of Exodus. Part 1 was about the story of the Exodus itself, how God brings Israel out of Egypt. Part 2 is about how God establishes Israel as a community of the covenant at a famous place, Mount Sinai. We think of that as where Moses gets the Ten Commandments. Well, there's a lot of stuff associated with Sinai. As you're reading this, remember that the whole story is about how God is fulfilling his promise to bless the nations through the seed, the descendants of Abraham. How he's going to make the world right again by this means. So, because Israel is that people, this people of God's promise, they're called to be a people of trust in God. They're called to be a people who reflect God's justice and mercy in their lives. And they're called to live in God's presence, just as God created humans to do back in the Garden of Eden. And the call to do those things is really what the covenant is all about, and what the terms of the covenant, God's law, or Torah, are all about. These are the terms by which God says Israel can live as his people. But there's a catch here. Israel is a very flawed people, and God knows that, even as he is giving them this covenant. God is not going to be surprised by what happens. In fact, as we read carefully, we see God knows this all along. So, along the way in our story, we'll see God providing for Israel in the wilderness, as they need. The wilderness, of course, in the Bible is the desert, and so they need food, they need water, and God provides that miraculously. They have enemies who attack them, and God is going to protect them from his enemies, just as he protected them from the Egyptians. But in the midst of this, Israel is going to complain. They're going to say, we want to go back to Egypt. And we're going to ask, you people, do you have hard hearts like Pharaoh? Yes, they do. Are you rebellious like Adam? Yes, they are. God is going to be present with Israel in the wilderness, but it's going to be scary. When Moses goes up on the mountain, there's lightning and thunder, and Israel's going to say, don't let him come to us. Don't make us talk to him. Moses, you do all the talking. So God is going to accommodate that. He's going to give them Moses as a prophet. He's going to give them Aaron as a priest who will mediate for them. He's going to represent and make real his presence with them in the tabernacle that he tells them to build. The tabernacle is a precursor of the temple that David and Solomon will build later in Jerusalem. Now, the tabernacle resembled a lot of pagan temples. It had various courts that were more and more restricted. A pagan temple in the middle would have an image of the god who was supposed to be there. Well, this tabernacle doesn't have any images, of course. Instead, at the middle is the Ark of the Covenant, which is a reminder to Israel of the way that God has established his covenant and how he's provided for them and how he has instructed them. A pagan temple was built to keep the god safe from the outside world, but the tabernacle is given to Israel to make it safe for Israel to approach God in worship, even though God, the presence of God is something that no one can endure. Interestingly, it's built out of the wealth that the Egyptians give, and it's built by a couple of guys who are gifted by God's Spirit to do, architecture and interior decorating. The Spirit of God empowers all kinds of things in God's plan. Of course, God gives the law to his people, but in that law, we're going to see not just God's justice, but accommodation of Israel's persistent sinfulness. Israel has just been liberated from slavery, but God's going to say, look, I know you're bad people, and you're going to want slaves. I don't want to give you slaves. I want to regulate this to bring a modicum of justice to it. I know I created human beings, male and female. The man will cleave to his wife, and the two will be one flesh. You're going to want to practice polygamy. I'm going to regulate that, make it very hard for you to do that. Well, in the midst of all of this, we're also going to be reading some Psalms. The Psalms are among some of the most famous in the Psalter, Psalm 22, 23, 24, 27, very famous Psalms. We'll see the suffering of God's people, God's care for his people, and the call to live as God's people, trusting him in a difficult world. So happy reading. I hope that you are blessed with a persistent habit of Bible reading through this program.